We remain standing now as we share in God's Word together. These words from Paul's letter to the church in Philippi, Philippians chapter 1, verses 18 through 20. What does it matter? Just this, that Christ is proclaimed in every way, whether out of false motives or true, and in that I rejoice. Yes, and I will continue to rejoice, for I know that through your prayers and the help of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, this will turn out for my deliverance. It is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be put to shame in any way, but that by my speaking with all boldness, Christ will be exalted now as always in my body, whether by life or by death. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Amen. You may be seated. We're beginning a new sermon series this week called Refocus. It's about finding focus in an unfocused world. If you felt just kind of unfocused as we've been going through the month of August and into September, and we hope that this series, these sermons will help give that focus, find that center in an unfocused world. We'll be traveling through the book of Philippians together. It's a letter from Paul to the church that he founded in Philippi. It's only 4 chapters long, and so we've developed a 4-part sermon series to help match those letters. And so we hope that you'll join us as we read through the book of Philippians together. This week will be chapter 1. We're talking about seeing differently. We'll do chapter 2 next week, 3, and then 4 will end our series together. So we hope that you'll join us as we help find focus in an unfocused world. And that's just kind of the way we seem, right? We just kind of seem unfocused. And whenever we're unfocused, it's really just that we can't see correctly. We just can't see the right way. Does anybody wear kind of glasses or contacts or reading glasses? Anybody do that? Have you ever known that you needed a prescription and not gotten it filled for your glasses? Has anybody known, oh, I need to get reading glasses, I'll get those later, or oh, I need to get, my prescription, I just need to get a new, eye exam later. I don't wear glasses, and so I really can't help comprehend this, but how is instantly improved vision not at the top of our to-do list? Does that make sense? I mean, it seems like something we would want to do right away, but we just put it off. We put it off, right, friends? Because we're unfocused people. We're unfocused people. Do you believe that? Maybe, we become both kind of farsighted and nearsighted at the same time. Maybe you're farsighted and you just kind of look to the future constantly, just thinking, all these problems, all these things that are going on right now, they'll work out in the end. Oh, it'll be all right. And no matter what comes up in front of you, no matter how many problems that come your way, you just keep thinking, oh, it just in the future, it'll be okay. We just got to get past this and it'll be all right. We just got to keep doing this and it'll be okay. And the truth is, things don't just magically get better. They just don't get better immediately. Or maybe you're nearsighted. Maybe you're nearsighted and you just feel like you're putting out fires every day, right? And you just one thing after another keeps coming up. And this is what some people call the tyranny of the urgent, right? The tyranny of the urgent. Just everything keeps coming up and I don't have enough time to look forward. I don't have enough time to get beyond tomorrow because all these problems are just coming up today. And I just keep doing one thing after another and we become unfocused. We become unfocused. The writer of the letter of James puts it in this way. He writes in chapter 1, verses 5 through 7, that if any of you is lacking in wisdom, you should ask God, who gives to all generously and ungrudgingly, and it will be given to you. But ask in faith, never doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave driven by the sea. For the doubter being what, friends? Double-minded and unstable in every way, must not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Being double-minded. Do you feel double-minded? Do you feel double-minded, just being unfocused? The way Eugene Peterson writes it in his translation of the Bible called The Message, he calls us wind-whipped waves, right? Wind-whipped waves. We just get tossed back and forth by the sea. We just get so unfocused. We just get so unfocused, friends, and we can't see correctly. We just can't see the right way. And it's for this reason that Paul writes to the church in Philippi. Paul writes to the church in Philippi, a church that he actually founded. We have a map here to show where Paul actually founded. You can see it there on the north part of the map, the top part up there in Macedonia. Paul helped founded this church along with Timothy and Silas and the help of a woman named Lydia. We read about the story of the founding of the church of Philippi in the book of Acts, chapter 16. We read these words there. that Paul says himself, Timothy, and Silas set sail from Troas and took a straight course to Samothrace, the following day to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is the leading city of the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. We remained in this city, he says, for some days. On the Sabbath day, we went outside the gate by the river, where we supposed there was a place of prayer, and we sat down and spoke to a woman who had gathered there. A certain woman named Lydia, a worshiper of God, was listening to us. She was from the city of Thyatira and a dealer in purple cloth. The Lord opened her heart to listen eagerly to what was said by Paul. When she and her household were baptized, she urged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come and stay at my home." And she prevailed upon us. So Paul, Timothy, and Silas are traveling, doing the ministry that they have set forth in doing. And when they get to Philippi, they find this woman, Lydia, and they start to tell her the good news, right? They start to tell her about the gospel message, the good news of Jesus Christ. And she becomes so transformed by this message that she demands that the men come to her home, that she and her entire home be baptized. In the church of Philippi, the people to whom Paul was writing was started by Lydia in her living room. Friends, this church was founded in her living room. That if you can believe that a church that was founded in a living room can change lives, here is proof. Right? Not only in the book of Philippians, but here in Acts 2, right? This church that was founded in a living room, this church that moved from high school to junior high to buildings to here, and now we are here, that we read about the book of Philippians. We read about the church in Philippi that was founded by one person who on a whim was baptized, friends. This is the power that Christ has in our lives to help us see things differently. To help us see things differently, friends. It's sometimes just like we can't see correctly, that when we are challenged by Christ to give something up, we just can't see it correctly. We just can't see it correctly. That when we're challenged to give up of our time, friend, all of our challenges are a choice. That when we commonly say that we don't have enough, it's true that the way we're living, we just don't have enough. But if we choose to give something up, that has the power to change the world. Then when we're challenged to give up our time, right? Maybe in volunteering in the children's program or to helping your neighbor or to volunteering at the food bank, that whatever it is, when we're challenged to give up our time, we come up with these excuses, right? These excuses to say, I just don't have enough time. I just don't have enough time. I've got to help, my child with their homework. These teachers just pile it on them, and I've got to sit here and make sure they do it. Or I don't have enough time. I've been doing this, or I've got to do that. Or maybe whenever we're challenged to give up of our money, our power, that when we're asked to give, we read in the Old Testament that they gave a 10% tithe, then we are challenged as well to give that up to God. And when we hear those words, we come up with these excuses and say, I just don't have enough. I'm barely getting by on the way it is, and I really just don't have enough. Or maybe we're asked just to give of our energy, our effort, and we think, man, when I get home, I'm just exhausted. I just don't have any more left to give. And even, friends, in the midst of suffering, we come up with excuses to say, now is just a time to look inwardly, just to stare at my navel, just to be me for a little bit in the midst of death and in the midst of tragedy and loss. We make these excuses, friends. And we lose the ability, like Christ, to see things truly differently. Well, this is what Paul wrote about. Right? He starts this church in Philippi, and then he and Timothy and Silas go off, and Silas breaks off from them, and Paul and Timothy go into Rome, and they continue to do the ministry that Christ has called them to, and they wind up finding themselves in jail for crimes against the Roman government. Mostly because in Roman times and in Paul's day and age, if you were a Roman country, if you were a Roman citizen, it meant that you practiced the religion of Rome. And that was to believe that the emperor, the Caesar, was Lord. that he was a deity, that he was God. And so if you found yourself in a Roman city, you would commonly see banners that would read, Caesar is Lord. Caesar is Lord. And so you can understand why two men traveling from city to city, starting churches, proclaiming that Christ is Lord, would find themselves in prison. So here they are, they find themselves in a Roman prison for 2 years, and Paul uses this time, this opportunity, to write to the churches that he started on his journey. Right? While he's found himself in these dank, dark prisons with barely any food and no clothing to spare, he writes to these churches to support them, to encourage them in their way. One of the letters he writes in the Roman prison was to the church in Philippi. And you can read these letters and know the circumstance in which they're written, and you just understand that Paul can't see things clearly. He just simply can't understand what is going on because it's just pretty clear that he doesn't get it. He doesn't see clearly. He's in one of the most depressing places in the world. He's in one of the most depressing places in the world, and he writes things like this. I want you to know, beloved, that what has happened to me has actually helped spread the gospel. And you say, Paul, you just don't see things clearly. You just can't see things clearly, Paul. You are in prison. You've hit rock bottom. Paul, there is nowhere but up from here, Paul. You have hit rock bottom. And he writes words like this. What does it matter? Just this, that Christ is proclaimed in every way, whether out of false motives or true, and in that I rejoice. Yes, and I will continue to rejoice. You say, Paul, you are in prison. You're in prison. This is not good, Paul. You are in the worst place imaginable. And he continues to write and says, it is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be put to shame in any way, but that by my speaking with all boldness, Christ will be exalted now as always in my body, whether by life or by death. Whether by life or by death, Paul, it might come to death. These people can kill you for what you've done. Paul, you could die for this. And he writes this word, for to me, living is Christ, and dying is what, friends? Gain. Because that's what Christ does for us. He helps us see differently. To see differently. Throughout the Gospels, we read of these miracles that Jesus performs. And one of the most popular ones is for Jesus to heal the blind. For Jesus to heal the blind. We read this beautiful story in the Gospel of John, chapter 9. That as Jesus was walking along, he saw a blind man who had been blind from his birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither. This man nor his parents sinned. He has been born blind so that God's work might be revealed in him. It's important to note that in the time of Jesus, if you had any abnormality, especially if it was from birth, if you had any abnormality, it was believed that God was punishing you for something. God was punishing you either for something you did or for something your parents or your family did, but it was clear that this was an intentional act of God that you had this abnormality. And so Jesus is asked by his disciples, well, which one was it, Jesus? Was it this man or his parents that sinned to cause him to be being born blind? And Jesus says, no, it's not like that. And I think it's also important to note that Jesus isn't saying that there aren't consequences to our actions. Right? I mean, it's clear that there are those, but this was not one of those circumstances. Jesus says, no, this whole entire event, this is occurring so that the glory of God can be proclaimed. And it's amazing what Jesus actually does for this man. He walks up to the man and he actually spits into the dirt in front of the man and he makes mud with his own saliva. And he takes the mud and he rubs it on the man's eyes. And he tells the man to go and wash in the pool of Siloam. And the man goes and he washes, and when he comes back out of the water, his eyesight is regained. He can see for the first time in his life. And so he goes throughout his day and just celebrating and praising God, and other people see him. Other people see him and they say, aren't you the man that was born blind that we've seen on the roadside begging every day of your life? You're the man who's been born blind. The man smiles and says, yes, I am. And they say, well, how is it then that you are seeing now, that you've regained your sight, that you're walking around, you're not on the side of the road blind anymore? And the man said, because of Jesus. And the people ask, well, where is he? Where is he? This story is beautiful because it's so much more than just sight. That sight is so much more than just about vision, friends. That Jesus not only healed the man who was blind, but he gave sight to the disciples when they asked about this sin, right? He helped the disciples see clearly about what truly was sin, that what truly is this thing that we are seeing here. Jesus helped correct the disciples' vision, and then when the man goes off and he tells more people about what has happened, what is their question? But where is he? Where is he so that we might have this life-changing power in our lives? Where is he that we might be healed? Where is he that we might tell others the good news? Where is he? Because that's what Christ does for us. He helps us see differently. He helps us see differently, friends. Read a little bit later in the Gospel of John, after Jesus has been crucified, that he was buried, and he rose again. And he came and he showed himself to the disciples, and they continued to do more ministry until finally it was time for Jesus to ascend back into heaven, to go and be with his heavenly Father. And before he leaves, he tells his disciples these words in the Gospel of John, chapter 14. He says, I will not leave you orphaned. I am coming to you. In a little while, the world will no longer see me, but you will see me. Because I live, you also will live. That it's clear to Jesus that the world will see differently than his followers. That the world will see differently than his followers. That after Jesus has gone, the world will no longer see Christ. But those who proclaim his name, those who profess to be his followers, they will see him. They will see him in the midst of tragedy and loss. They will see him in the midst of all of these things, that Christ's followers will be the one who notices him, who sees the world as Christ sees it. And so we have this option, friends. We have this decision to see the world as the world sees it, or to see the world as Christ sees it. Because we could stay and see the world as the world continues to see it. And we could be both nearsighted or farsighted or whatever that is. And the truth is, we could live our lives that way, and we would have built-in excuses for the rest of our lives. Friends, we could live this way, and people have done so adequately, and they've gotten by. Or we could see the world as Christ sees it. We could see the world as Christ sees it, and that would have the power to not only change our lives, but to change the world, friends. So the question is, how will you see it? When we're asked to give up of our time, it might look a little bit like this. And we can say, when we're asked to give up of our time, you know, would you give up of your time? Would you give of your time to this organization or that, to the church or to somebody else? And then you can say, well, you know, I'm just not sure. It kind of looks like time. If you don't have your glasses on, it kind of looks like time. I know that it's like this, and I just don't have enough of it. You know, I do this and that, and I go back and forth, and I barely get by on my own. Or friends, we could see the world as Christ sees it. Right? We could see the world as Christ sees it, and it truly looks differently than we could ever see on our own. It truly looks like something that Christ might have for this world, and we would come to understand that our time is valuable. Our time is valuable, and because it is so valuable, Christ asks of it from us. To not only spend on ourselves and our families, but to spend on Christ's family. That's pretty fun, right? I love the picture of you guys just like... This. I could never say anything serious like this in front of you, right? Thank you, guys. No, this is cool, right? But so we could see the world as the world sees it, kind of blurry and kind of out of focus, or we could see the world as Christ sees it. And it's something that we could never see on our own. It's something that we could never see on our own. Maybe we're asked to give up of our money. right? And if we're asked to give up our money, and we could see it like this, and it kind of looks like it, but not really. And we could say, oh, I just don't have enough. I just don't have enough to give, and I'm barely getting by on my own, and I really just don't have enough to give. Or we could see the world as Christ sees it. We could see the world as Christ sees it, and we could come to understand that our money is our power. And that if we want to profess to be followers of Christ, that means that we give up our power to Christ. And maybe that means that you give up 1 or 3% or maybe even 10%, but what Christ calls us to is to give our entire lives to Him. That we would give up our power as well. But this is the way it is for everything, right? Even when we're asked to give up of our energy, that we might give up of our time and our money and our energy. And even in the midst of suffering, friends, even in the midst of tragedy and loss, even as we remember awful events that have even happened in our own homeland, that we remember that Christ has the power to redeem those moments, those times. Christ has the power to call that back to Himself. That we could choose to see suffering the way the world sees it, as this totally senseless, random act. Or we could choose to see suffering the way Christ sees it, as something able to be redeemed. Martin Luther King Jr. would say that God redeems suffering, that God wrings goodness out of suffering the way we wring water out of a washcloth. That was what Christ has the power to do in the midst of suffering. So how will we see the world as the world sees it or as Christ sees it? There was a man by the name of Rabbi Hugo Grin who would commonly tell the stories that he experienced in Nazi Germany while he and his family suffered under the Nazi regime in concentration camps. And he would tell the story of actually being in Auschwitz with his family and watching the passing of his brother and his grandfather. And there came a point at which he and his father were in barracks together. That they stayed in bunks right next to each other. And Hugo would remember one particular night when his father was reminded that night was the first night of Hanukkah. Hanukkah is the festival of lights of the Jewish tradition, and to remember those events, you typically light a candle for each night of the night of Hanukkah. And so once Hugo's father learned that this was the first night, he went and found some tin. And he molded the tin in the shape of a candle. And he went and got some cloth and he fed it into the tin to form a wick. And then Hugo recalls to his amazement that he saw his father reach into his bunk and he grabbed a piece of butter. A piece of butter that he had apparently been holding on to for quite some time. Hugo said that he was amazed not only to see him grab the piece of butter out of his bunk, but to use it as oil for the candle. As oil for the candle. And he remembers watching his father form all of this. And then after he lit the candle, Hugo reprimanded his father. And he said, "You've had this butter this entire time. You've had this butter this entire time. That could have been sustenance to me or to you or to somebody else, but here you've used it as oil for a candle." And his father said, "Hugo, you and I both know that man can live several days without food. But I tell you, man cannot live one day without hope." Amen.